Senator Tom Cotton proposes a bill that would prohibit federal funding for the 1619 rewrite of American history in public schools. Finally a chance to say, without any sarcasm, that's a bold strategy, Cotton. Let's hope it pays off. I'm Dr. Duke, she's Katie, and this is the Dr. Duke Show. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Dr. Duke Show, the only program that keeps you educated on the craziness impacting K-12 classrooms and college campuses around the world. Today, we start by tipping our cap to Senator Tom Cotton, who has bravely come forth and introduced a bill that would stop federal funds from being used to teach the reckless and ahistorical New York Times ridiculous 1619 project to little kids in your public schools. And this is a big deal. Now, again, is it going to pass the Senate?
Is it going to get anywhere?
Is it going to go anywhere in the House? Absolutely not. But at least Tom Cotton is sending a warning signal. Look, you think it's bad now. Look out your windows if you live in Seattle. Look out your window if you live in Minneapolis or New York or Los Angeles. Do you see what's happening to your city? It's primarily because young people between the ages of 18 and 30 who make up most of Black Lives Matter and all of Antifa are destroying your cities. Where did they learn to do that? They learned that not only is it a good thing to do that, it is a virtuous thing to burn, loot, pillage, and beat people up. They learned it in your public universities and colleges. Now, the 1619 history program, created by Black Lives Matter, is going to go back and already further destroy the teaching of history in this country, further link it to slavery, further insist that every aspect of American culture, from the best to the worst and all across the spectrum, everything America has ever done in the last 400 years is inevitably tied to slavery and must be discounted as white supremacy.
And the 1619 project actually came out of the New York Times from Nicole Hannah-Jones, and it was her little brainchild, and she actually just proposed this in a meeting of the New York Times at one point, and they're like, yep, okay, let's go with it. And since that time, it has just taken over everything. Even Oprah is on board with doing projects with this, and so it's now trying to get into our schools. So Senator Tom Cotton, it's a brave act for him to have to actually put out a bill called Saving American History Act of 2020. It's a sad testament that we even have something called that, but that's where we're at right now.
Well, it shows you how bad it is. We're going to do this story next week, but we have an Illinois lawmaker who has now called for the cessation of all history teaching in the public school. Stop it. Because when you teach history based on dates and facts and places, when you talk about the Civil War and the Revolutionary War, when you explain the rise of free markets and capitalism, you talk about the triumph of the middle class in this country. Now, all of that, what we used to consider history, is white supremacist and racist. So this Illinois lawmaker is also demanding stop all history teaching because traditional history teaching is racist. Now, here's the thing. You and I both know what textbooks they're using for history in the public schools. They are already teaching a socialist history of America, the Howard Zinification of our kids' education. And note that the radical leftist program, socialist program of teaching history, is already being called racist for not focusing enough on Black lives. This is a disaster waiting to happen. Your 5 and 6 and 7-year-olds, all they're going to learn about your country is that it's racist and sexist and bigoted and homophobic and transphobic. All you're going to learn is the wealth that this country has acquired, the freedom, the opportunity it has afforded its people, the banning of slavery, the only country in the history of the world to fight a war to end slavery. And that's not all that proves is that we are a bunch of racist white supremacists.
Well, duh. But by him actually coming out and saying we need to get rid of history, it solves the problem that all these leftists have had of they want to teach all the race and gender stuff and sexuality and all that stuff. And it's been, well, when are they going to be able to teach it, though, because they have all these other classes? Well, that obviously just takes away all of history altogether. Now you don't even need to cover it as being history. Now it can just be full-on ethnic studies or whatever it may be that they're going to call it. But for the bill specifically, when you talked about how that dates are somehow racist and bigoted and all that, well, the 1619 project then should be, because that should be gotten rid of, because they're claiming that 1619 was our founding. That was when we were founded. However, according to Senator Tom Cotton's bill, The true date of America's founding is July 4th, 1776, the day the Declaration of Independence was adopted by the Second Continental Congress. The self-evident truths set forth by that declaration are the fundamental principles upon which America was founded.
Congratulations.
Obvious.
Yes, exactly.
Obvious. But yet, if you asked pretty much anyone, K-12 or even college, when was America's founding? What is the Declaration of Independence? Heck, what is a Congress? Second Continental Congress? They probably never even heard of it.
So long before this, we stopped teaching traditional history. We stopped teaching the narrative that America was and is, by the way, an exceptional country. It's one of the few genuine republics in the history of the world. It is a long-standing republic. It lasted beyond the vast majority of republics that have ever been tried. The only one that existed longer was the ancient Roman Republic, and that gave rise to some pretty good things in the ancient world. And here you have a situation now where we've already given up that. And then we've already, for 20 years, been teaching your kids a socialist, left-wing version of our history that sees America as responsible for all the world's problems. And then finally now, they're going to not even bother teaching your kids any kind of history except a radical left-wing history that blames America for everything. And think about the sexuality teaching in your schools. The same way that teaching sex in schools is now not limited to biology class, it's not now limited to social study, to health class. It's part of the entire curriculum. So too now will the 1619 curriculum be the main focus of your kids' schooling.
And everyone go out right now, support Senator Tom Cotton's bill, because he, in the bill, wants no federal funds to be given to these schools if they do the 1619 project. We need momentum to get it going.
Yeah, he's up against it because you've got, it's an election year, Trump's fate is uncertain. You've also got a Congress that's not going to vote for any of this. Nevertheless, support the initiative.
Well, one of those states that we know will not support anything coming out of Tom Cotton's mouth is the state of California, where the California State University Board of Trustees now has passed general ed requirements that will ensure all 430,000 students, that's how many undergrads they have in the state of California, across 23 different campuses. Now, they will all be taking an ethnic studies or a social justice course in order to graduate, because now they must. That's where we are. Beginning actually in 2023. This is, it takes a little bit for them to get it implemented, but beginning in 2023, the requirement can be satisfied with a host of social justice offerings, including police reform, disparities in public health, and the economies of racism.
Yeah, and so not only as in the public schools, as in the universities. Not only, and I teach at the University of Wisconsin here, and I tell you, there are more non-Western requirements. There are more diversity requirements than there are anything else. Our kids are already forced to take courses in ethnic studies, identity politics studies, non-Western literature, non-Western history, over and over again. In fact, you walk into a typical modern university, and the vast majority of what what every student is required to take and what every student in each individual major is required to take overwhelmingly is not Western culture. And so now you're going to come along. It's not enough to teach African American lit and Hispanic Latinx literature or history. It's not enough to teach transgender history or gay history. It's not enough to teach feminism, Marxism, all of these perspectives on how you read books. No. Now, on top of everything else, every single school college kid in California will have to take one of these courses. How to defund the police, right?
But there's actually a little bit of outrage potentially from the left wing because it's not enough. It's not enough for them. There's outrage by them. The activists have accused the Board of Trustees of diluting basically to what they want, the importance of their ethnic studies, by creating a requirement that, while it is still focused on social justice, they say, it allows courses outside of the traditional scope of the field to be substituted. So part of the ethnic studies traditionally, as you mentioned, African American studies, Native American studies, Latino American studies, Asian American studies. Okay. New requirements could include classes, in Jewish or Muslim studies, LGBTQ studies, or social justice, including courses on social change and social movements in the U.S., historical and cultural perspectives in disability studies, and health disparities in urban communities.
Yeah, I'm sure that pretty soon they're going to add fat studies to that. This is
health
disparities. You do see this, right? That when did social justice become the purpose of colleges? When, and I'll tell you, the answer in the last 10 years. where the entire purpose of college has nothing to do with getting you a degree that you can use for a career or a degree that you can use for further study. It's not about making you a well-rounded, culturally aware individual. It's not about education for education's sake. It's not about the ideal sense of an educated person in a constitutional republic and all the rights, the responsibilities that come with freedom and liberty. It's not about that. It's simply now from the top to the bottom and through across the sciences, the social sciences, and the humanities. It's all about indoctrinating you into a particularly left-wing way of thinking.
Well, not according to the chancellor.
Well, gee.
Timothy White said Timothy White, he needs to change his name.
That name's got to go.
He said the ethnic studies and social justice requirement will empower our students to meet this moment in our nation's history, giving them the knowledge, broad perspectives, and skills needed to solve society's most pressing problems.
Yeah, not enough social justice is the problem. And so again, this is California, Mom and Dad, and what they're doing now, you can really bet your bottom dollar that in 5 years it's going to be in your Nebraska college, it's going to be in your Montana technical college, it's going to be in your 2-year Alabama school. This is going to be, it's already moving that way, but the transformation of American education system from public school, kindergarten, all the way through college is rapidly happening so that every single thing that you do in school has to have a left-wing political civic engagement. You're turning these kids into ignorant, low-level thinking activists who aren't getting a real education.
You said turning, they already turned.
They're turned.
But one interesting aspect of this is it's not finalized yet because there's, of course, within the California Senate and the California Assembly, they're doing their own thing. So they're continuously trying to make, ratchet up these ethnic studies. Yeah, but Chancellor White also said this, which fascinated me. Government specifying a specific curriculum area is extraordinarily dangerous. Let's not cross that Rubicon.
Well, what he's saying is let's have a whole host of liberal courses, not one.
But that it just, the sex ed required, the specific curriculum that the government requires in California. It's fascinating to me.
It's hypocritical as well. And you look at the fact that California has literally no Republicans anywhere. I mean, they have supermajorities all across that state. They just do it. They rubber stamp this stuff. It doesn't matter. And when it's done, then every other liberal state says, hey, we can do this too. And there's the model, right? California is doing it. We can do this too. And so, there is very little place inside public education that your kids are going to be safe from this stuff. You've got to find a way to get around this system.
And as we just said, we were talking about California, but this is happening right here in the Midwest, all this crazy. It's happening in Illinois, which, if you know anything about Illinois, it has Chicago, and Chicago basically is a left-wing pit hole. But downstate, down in the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign, they're actually now, all the students have gathered around to yell at members of the Federalist Society. They're now demanding that the Federalist Society chapter that's on the campus has to come out in favor of Black Lives Matter. They just said they want to remain neutral on the topic, but oh no, that is not enough. They must come out in favor. And so a law student, I'm going to call her a so-called law student, Celestina Radagno, actually wrote a letter that says, I am incredibly proud to be part of an institution among leaders who, when faced with the recent cries from the Black community, who has for their entire existence in this country been oppressed, amplified these cries loud enough so that those in power will finally hear. But amongst the dialogue and the cries, there is a tangible silence that should not be ignored. This is the silence of the Federalist Society.
Yeah, and this is a law student, and you can see what's happening in the study.
So-called.
The two departments on any college campus that you should stay away with, that because they're even more liberal than the others, are education and law. The law schools in this country are turning out lawless and law-ignorant lawyers like this. That you can have a law school student, right? Somebody's going to be a lawyer. And think about the degree to which all of our politicians are lawyers. Yes. Think about how this country is governed by lawyers. Shakespeare was right, as he said in one of his Henry plays, let's kill all the lawyers kill him tonight, right? We've got to do something about this. The problem is that this is a law student in training who basically made the historical assumption that African Americans have been persecuted since the moment they got here.
Their
without
entire
any
existence.
break from that. Tell that to Barack Obama and LeBron James. This idea that somehow that the only experience African Americans have ever had in this country is one of racism and oppression is an outright lie. But this woman's going to be a lawyer someday. And notice what she's doing. She is telling you that she, as a lawyer, somebody who is responsible for the law, which is based on the Constitution, that they have the right to tell a group of students on campus that they will actively support Black Lives Matter or they will drive them off campus.
Yes. It just made me think, do you think she supports Clarence Thomas? Does she look up to Clarence Thomas, considering she's going to be a lawyer?
Given what she's already said, I wonder if she could even name the 9 Supreme Court justices. Do you think she could?
Whoa. Does she know how many are on the Supreme Court?
Yeah. Well, does that matter because they're going to pack the court,
6?
right?
Oh, that's a good point.
Biden's already said
Once
they get the power again, they're going to fill it full of people. But
Yeah.
again, this is a loss. This is the future of the country. The disproportionate impact that lawyers have on our country, not just because of how they can use the courts for garbage like this, but because of how many become politicians.
And, of course, this letter that Rodagno wrote goes on to explain how, because the Federalist Society did not affirmatively state that Black Lives Matter, and they didn't pledge to be anti-racist. And that's the thing. You must make a pledge so you don't get scolded by the woke scolds. Because if you say that, then it defends you for like a hot second. According to Rodagno, she claims that the organization in the past, the Federalist Society, has come out in the past and supported things, but the Federalist Society said, we don't issue or sign on to any statements per policy or orders by their national society. But then she brought up, well, here's a list of all the things you have said, and you're covering it up by calling it, debates on campus. But you're bringing in people that talk about abortion and things.
It must be said that what left-wingers like Rodagno think racism is, to say that I don't support Black Lives Matter because their founders are Marxist, that's racist. To say that Antifa and Black Lives Matter don't have the right to violently protest, that's racist to them.
Well, and this is exactly what we've talked about many a times. Black Lives Matter, with all the capitals, the organization, you cannot support. But support that Black lives do matter.
Just say it once and be done with it.
That's
all lives matter. Black unborn lives matter. Black cop lives matter. All lives matter. End of story. Period. Exclamation point. Piss off, left.
It's time for some real education. Lorenzo de' Medici, the brilliant, learned, and ruthless head of a wealthy banking family, ruled the Italian city-state of Florence in the Renaissance in the late 15th century. The National Gallery of Art in Washington, D.C. displays a curious and intense bust of Lorenzo, most likely a copy of a wax model made to commemorate Lorenzo's survival of an assassination attempt in 1478. Cleaning in recent years has brought out the original bright reds, warm flesh tones, and a light beard. The brooding face suggests the forceful intelligence behind Lorenzo's power.
Yeah, this is a really important person. This is one of the most important people of the entire Renaissance. Not just the Italian Renaissance, but the Renaissance generally. He was actually given the name, and wouldn't you love to one day be given the name like Magnifico? This is Lorenzo the Magnifico, the Magnificent, right? That's a great, we've got, what does Rush Limbaugh call Reagan? Ronaldus Magnus. That's pretty good. But Lorenzo the Magnificent is pretty good as well. Now, this guy was a power player. He was besides having the control eventually of the Medici family, the family of bankers, really one of the first great banking families to use capital and interest to make a lot of money. And by controlling the banks, not just in Italy and Florence, but really all across the Western world, Medici bankers were as far flung as England all the way down to the shores of India. And you had just an incredible amount of wealth. All of that travel and all of that connection, however, really furthered the Renaissance. It brought all of these different aspects of Western culture together. It in his own salon, in his own the Medici mansions, Lorenzo would bring talented young people to their artists and artistas, and they would train them and they would give them a place to live. They would patronize them, including no less a figure than Michelangelo. Michelangelo cut his teeth at the Medici palaces under Lorenzo. Verrocchio, a great artist in his own right, was part of this circle, who was a tutor and a mentor for Michelangelo. And it was initially thought, take a look at this bust of Lorenzo. It was initially thought that Lorenzo himself was more artistically involved than people had thought before. That with Verrocchio, he was the person initially ascribed to this bust, but now as Katie pointed out, the Washington Museum of Art, the National Gallery, just got done putting this back on display after a huge cleaning process. When you look at when you used to be able to see this statue, it was a really dark umber. The whole thing looked like it was almost bronze. It was so covered with dirt and paint and overlay. But look at how just incredibly expressive now that they've cleaned it. You can see purples and blues and greens. You can see the flesh tones. You can see the slight blush on his cheek, coral pink in his lips. But one of the most interesting aspects of this is the expression on his face, the El Magnifico, right? This is one of the most influential men in the history of the world in terms of his power, his reach. All the city-states of the Italian League was held together by the Medici family. The defense of Florence and the golden age of Renaissance culture happened under his watch. Not only was Michelangelo part and parcel of this, but Verrocchio, Michelangelo's teacher, may be responsible. We used to think he was responsible for this bust, but ever since the cleaning, we have decided no, more likely that a student or a tutor of Verrocchio, working with other people as well, put the statue together. And if you look at it one more time, if you think about what the Renaissance meant for Western culture, I personally think it was a bigger deal than the Enlightenment. You got the Renaissance and you got the Enlightenment. There could have been no Enlightenment without the Renaissance. And it all began with a look back to the ancient world. The Renaissance took 10 steps forward by first going back to the classics of Greece and Rome. It was about the time that Lorenzo lived. Lorenzo died in 1492. In April of 1492, just before the miraculous discoveries of Columbus, Lorenzo died, and it really did sort of put an end to the real power of the Medici here, and it ended a certain aspect of the Renaissance. But it was about the same time, for the very first time since the ancient world, that Italians were teaching Greek in their universities. So it wasn't a matter of reading medieval Latin translations of the Greek classics anymore. You could go back and learn Greek at the University of Bologna, or Padua, or Rome, and you could actually study under Byzantine scholars who had fled the Turkish invasion, who were teaching Greek in Roman universities, which brought back all of those great texts. People were reading Vitruvius, the architect, and boom, you get St. Peter's Dome, right? You were reading the great treatises on art and painting and sculpture, and look at what they were able to accomplish. And you go back one last time for a salute to the recently cleaned and restored bust of Lorenzo Medici, Lorenzo the Magnificent, in the National Gallery in Washington, D.C. If you get a chance to go, try to stare him down. Just try to see if you can stare him down, right? The more you stare at the statue, the more angry it seems to get.
Well, once you're done staring him down, make sure you follow us on Facebook and Parler. And if you have any questions, visit freedomproject.com/askduke. Now, don't forget, the Dr. Duke Show is offered on more than 12 podcast platforms, such as Apple, Stitcher, and Spotify. Simply subscribe and consider leaving us the coveted 5-star review to keep the show growing. Now we're going to wrap things up, as we always do, with our fun fact of the day. And we're going to talk about Senator Tom Cotton, because he's a good guy. I did not know this, but he barely spoke until he was 3 years of age because he had a speech impediment. And just to think that he's writing bills in the Senate, he's very outspoken now, and who knows, could be the future of a certain Republican Party. So basically, until he was the age of 3, his sister spoke for him, but now he's found his voice. And it was fascinating to me to learn that his dad worked for the Arkansas Department of Health, and his mom was a longtime principal of a middle school.
Ooh, I wish I was in the land of cotton. Old times there are not forgotten. Do-do-do, do-do-do, do-do-do. And that's going to do it for us on this show. For the Freedom Project, I'm Dr. Duke, she's Katie. Until next time, stay educated, my friends, or at least try.